I realized something was wrong the moment I opened the shared iPad and saw her messages popping up like fireworks I didn't ask for. Her name, Megan, right there at the top of a thread with a man I recognized because I'd seen his face in old photos she kept in a shoebox under her bed, the kind you don't accidentally hold on to unless they still mean something. I didn't even have to scroll far before my stomach dropped. Jokes that felt too familiar, a late night you up? From him, and her reply coming back with an ease that made my jaw lock. I heard my own voice in the kitchen, sharper than I meant it to be, saying her name like an accusation while my son, Caleb, was in the living room building a Lego set, and her daughter, Emma, was humming some cartoon song at the table like the world was safe. Megan looked up from rinsing a cup, water running, hands steady, eyes tired in a way I hadn't noticed until that second, like she'd been carrying something heavy and hoped it wouldn't spill. I held the iPad out as if it was evidence in a courtroom, and I hated how much my hands were shaking because it made me feel weak, like a man who couldn't control his own fear. "So, this is what we're doing?" I asked, and the way she exhaled, slow, controlled, made me feel even angrier because I wanted panic, I wanted guilt, I wanted something that proved I was right to be scared. "Can you not do this right now?" she said quietly, glancing toward the kids, and that felt like dismissal, like she was asking me to swallow it. I followed her into the hallway anyway, away from their ears, but close enough that I could still hear the soft clack of Legos and Emma's spoon against a bowl. "Who is he to you right now, Megan?" I demanded, and it came out with that ugly edge I swore I didn't have anymore, the edge my ex used to accuse me of back when everything was falling apart. Megan stared at me like she was deciding whether to talk to a stranger or the man she'd moved into this house with. The man she'd trusted with her daughter's bedtime routines and my son's school pickup. The man she'd started calling home, out loud. "He's part of my past," she said, and I cut in immediately because the word past sounded like a lie when it was still sitting in our present. "Then cut him off," I snapped. "Why is he texting you at midnight? Why are you answering?" And that's when she straightened her shoulders like she was done being cornered, her voice low but solid. "I'm not cutting off my past just because you're insecure," she said, each word careful, like a surgeon making a clean incision. I felt heat crawl up my neck, a mix of humiliation and fury, because she'd said the thing I was terrified of, that this wasn't about her, it was about me. "Insecure?" I echoed, bitter, because I'd been the one paying most of the mortgage since she'd moved in, the one who'd taken on her daughter like she was mine, the one who'd tried to prove I wasn't like the men who leave. I wanted to list every sacrifice like it was a receipt that earned me control. But before I could, she added, softer, "And I'm not hiding anything. You found the messages because you were looking." That landed like a punch because it was true. I'd been looking. I'd told myself it was innocent, that I needed the iPad for Caleb's homework, but my finger had hovered too easily over her notifications, like part of me had been waiting for a reason to be right. The kids' laughter drifted in from the living room, and something in me cracked open with shame, because I saw the kind of home we were trying to build and the way my fear was swinging a wrecking ball through it. I swallowed hard, stared at her face, this woman who had survived things I still didn't fully understand, and I heard myself say, quietly, "Fair point." The words tasted like surrender and relief at the same time. Megan's eyes flickered, like she didn't believe me yet. "Accepted," I added, because I wanted it to be true, because I wanted to be the kind of man who could look his own insecurity in the face and not demand someone else bleed to make it go away. But even as I said it, I felt the old panic curling in my chest because accepting it meant I had to confront the real problem. My fear wasn't coming from her texts, it was coming from the places in me that had never healed, and from the people around us who had been quietly feeding that fear like it was their job. When I tell people now that my relationship almost ended because of a shoebox and a midnight text, they assume it's simple, like jealousy is this one-note character that shows up and ruins the plot. It wasn't simple. It was layered, like everything that matters. I'd been divorced for 3 years when I met Megan, living in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a house that still felt like an echo. My ex, Lauren, and I had ended in the ugliest way. Lawyers, custody schedules, accusations that turned friends into witnesses. I took Caleb half the week, and on the nights he wasn't here, I kept the TV on just to have noise. My family had opinions about my divorce that they disguised as concern, and the loudest opinion belonged to my mother, Diane, who treated Lauren like she'd been stolen from us by sin and treated me like a man who'd been publicly embarrassed. She never said it outright, but her tone did. You are wronged, and wronged men don't heal. They harden. When Megan came into my life, she did it gently, like she was stepping into a room where someone might spook. We met at a community fundraiser at a brewery downtown, one of those events where people donate in exchange for raffle tickets and pretend it's casual, while they quietly scout who belongs. Megan was there with Emma, 6 years old then, because the event had a kid-friendly area. I noticed her because she wasn't performing. She looked tired, like she'd come straight from work, but when Emma tugged her sleeve, Megan bent down and listened like nothing else existed. I remember thinking, that's what I want around my son. When we started dating, Megan told me early on she'd been married young, divorced young, and that she and her ex, Jason, shared a history that didn't evaporate just because paperwork said so. She didn't talk about him like a villain. That confused me at first because my divorce had trained me to think in enemies. Megan talked about Jason like a person who'd been important, who'd hurt her in some ways and helped her in others, and who was still connected to her life through mutual friends and through the fact that Emma had questions about where she came from. Jason wasn't Emma's dad. Emma's father had left when she was a baby, a different story Megan only touched with a tightness around her mouth. But Jason had been there for years, had loved Emma in his own way, and had stayed present as a kind of uncle figure after the marriage ended. I told myself I was fine with it because I wanted to be fine with it. I told myself I was mature, a father, a homeowner, a man who'd survived divorce and didn't need to cling. But the truth was, the more stable Megan was, the more my insecurity had room to speak, because stability gave me space to notice the cracks in myself. And my mother noticed too. Diane met Megan exactly twice before she started making comments that sounded harmless unless you listen close. She's very confident, she'd say, like confidence was a warning label. Or, it's good she has friends. Some women isolate men. Or, she keeps so many mementos. I guess that's modern. Diane never accused Megan directly. She planted doubts like seeds and acted surprised when they sprouted. My sister, Allison, followed Diane's lead in a softer way. She'd ask questions with a smile, like, so Megan's ex still comes around? That's interesting. And then she'd glance at me like I should feel something about it. Even Caleb, innocent as he was, became a mirror for my fear. He liked Megan. He liked her calm. He liked that she didn't raise her voice, that she asked him about school like it mattered. And sometimes I'd catch him laughing with her and feel this irrational, ugly flicker. What if he loves her more than he loves me? What if I'm replaceable? Megan and I moved in together after a year, not because we were reckless, but because the kids were already weaving into each other's lives like threads, and the logistics of 2 single parents in 2 homes was exhausting. Megan's job as a dental office manager was stable but not high-paying, and I made more in IT, so we agreed on a split that made sense. We created routines: Sunday grocery runs, Wednesday homework nights, Friday movie nights. It was real. And yet the shoebox existed. Megan kept it in our closet, not hidden like contraband, but not displayed either. When I asked about it once, she said, "It's memories, not instructions." I laughed then, like a man who understood. I didn't realize how much that box bothered me until my mother came over one Saturday when Megan wasn't home and accidentally opened the closet while looking for a broom. Diane's face tightened when she saw the box. "What's that?" she asked, already knowing. I told her it was Megan's old stuff. Diane made a sound that was half pity, half judgment. "I just don't want you going through all this again," she said, and it sounded like love, but it felt like a hook. That hook stayed in me. So when the midnight texts appeared on the iPad, my insecurity didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of years of being told, subtly and repeatedly, that I needed to protect myself, that women leave, that love is a risk you control through vigilance. It came from my own divorce trauma, from the nights Lauren had stayed out and I'd spiraled, from the times I'd sworn I'd never be blindsided again. Megan didn't know all those layers, not fully, because I'd been proud about my pain, ashamed of it, like admitting I still hurt would make me less of a man. And the people who should have wanted my healing, my mother especially, preferred my fear because fear kept me close to them, kept me dependent on their wisdom, kept me from forming a life they couldn't supervise. The hardest part to admit is that Megan wasn't the one who introduced control into our home. I did, quietly at first, dressed up as concern. After that hallway moment, after fair point and accepted, I tried to prove I meant it. I apologized for snooping. I told Megan I'd talk to someone, maybe a therapist, because the jealousy wasn't about her. She didn't gloat. She didn't punish me. She just nodded and said, "I need you to mean it." And the simplicity of that made me feel both cared for and terrified. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about her past, not in dramatic confession dumps, but in everyday moments. How she'd grown up in a small town outside Charlotte with parents who fought in whispers so neighbors wouldn't hear. How she'd married Jason at 22 because everyone said it was time, and because he felt safe. How safety can sometimes be another kind of cage. She explained that Jason wasn't a cheater, not in the classic sense. He was a slow eroder. He questioned her choices until she questioned herself. He mocked her laugh until she stopped laughing. He called her too emotional whenever she cried and then accused her of being cold when she shut down. When she finally left, it wasn't because of one explosive event. It was because she looked in the mirror one day and didn't recognize the woman staring back. I listened, and I felt anger for her, but I also felt an uncomfortable recognition. I'd been edging toward that same erosion when I demanded she cut off her past. Megan also told me about Emma's biological father, a man named Trent, who had vanished after promising he'd be present. She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it like she'd accepted a wound that never fully closes. Emma doesn't need another man disappearing. She told me once when Caleb asked if I'd be at his school event and Emma piped up, "Will you be there too?" My chest tightened. I promised. And I meant it. But while Megan and I were building something honest, Diane was collecting ammunition. My mother couldn't stand the fact that Megan didn't perform gratitude for being welcomed. Megan was polite, warm even, but she didn't shrink. If Diane made a passive comment, Megan didn't laugh nervously. She asked what Diane meant. That alone made Diane see her as a threat. The family dynamic in my house had always been clear. Diane set the emotional temperature and everyone else adjusted. I'd adjusted my entire life. Megan didn't. Allison started calling Megan intense behind her back. My Uncle Ron joked that I'd picked a bossy one. They said these things like harmless teasing, but it was all part of the same narrative. Megan was too much. Megan needed taming. Megan might humiliate me the way Lauren supposedly did. And because I still carried divorce shame, I was vulnerable to that narrative. I started noticing things through my family's lens. If Megan mentioned Jason in passing, like, "Jason recommended that mechanic, he's honest," I'd feel a flare of irritation. If she laughed at a memory from her 20s, I'd wonder if she missed that life more than she liked this one. I didn't accuse her. I did something worse. I withdrew. I'd get quiet. I'd answer in one-word sentences. I'd make her work for reassurance. Megan would notice, of course, and she'd ask, "Where did you go just now?" And I'd say, "Nowhere," because admitting jealousy felt childish. The kids picked up on it too, because children are emotional detectives. Caleb would look at me like he wanted to ask if everything was okay, but didn't have words. Emma would hover near Megan when my energy got cold. Megan, trying to protect them, started handling my moods gently, which only reinforced the unfair power dynamic. She was managing my insecurity like it was part of the household chores. Then came the first real rupture with my family, the kind that exposes how little love there is beneath concern. It was Thanksgiving at my mother's house. Megan and I had agreed to go because family mattered, and I wanted to prove we could blend. Megan brought a homemade sweet potato casserole. Emma wore a dress Megan had picked, hair neatly braided. Caleb had rehearsed a joke to tell Grandpa. Everything looked normal. Diane hugged Megan a little too stiffly, then immediately asked, loudly, "So, Megan, are you still keeping in touch with all your exes, or just the important ones?" The room went quiet in that unnatural way where everyone pretends they didn't hear, even though they did. Megan's eyes flicked to me, not for rescue but for information. Is this what you allow? My throat tightened. I forced a laugh, said, Mom, come on. But it was weak. Diane smiled sweetly. I'm just curious, she said. We all want what's best for you. Megan set the casserole down carefully, wiped her hands on a towel, and said calmly, If you're curious, you can ask without trying to shame me in front of the kids. Diane's smile froze. Allison let out a small, shocked breath like Megan had slapped Diane. Later, my mother cornered me in the kitchen and hissed, She's disrespectful, like Megan had violated a sacred rule. I should have defended Megan right then. I didn't. I said, She's just setting a boundary. And Diane's eyes narrowed. Boundaries, she repeated, spitting the word like it was a trend. You're letting her control you. That sentence lodged in my brain because it hit my deepest fear, being seen as weak. And Diane knew exactly where to press. That night, after we left, Megan didn't yell. She didn't demand I cut my mother off. She just said, I can't be in a family where I'm treated like a problem, and the quiet sadness in her voice was worse than anger. I promised I'd handle it. I believed I could. I didn't understand yet that Diane wasn't going to stop with comments. Diane wanted proof that Megan could be pushed out, and she was willing to use my insecurity, my finances, and my children to do it. The escalation didn't start with shouting. It started with a whisper campaign that made me question my own reality. A week after Thanksgiving, Allison texted me screenshots, cropped, out of context, of Megan's social media from years ago, posts with Jason tagged, photos of them at a beach, captions like, best weekend ever. Allison wrote, not trying to start drama, but I'd want to know. My stomach dropped even though the posts were old, because the timing wasn't. I confronted Megan that night, not about the posts but about the feeling they stirred, that she'd lived a whole life before me, that she might still be emotionally attached. Megan looked at the screenshots and laughed once, not amused but exhausted. That's from 2016, she said. Do you want me to delete my entire history? I felt stupid, but instead of admitting it, I doubled down. Why is it still up? I demanded, and the question made me hate myself because I heard Diane's voice in it. Megan's eyes went hard. Because I'm not erasing myself for anyone, she said. And then, because she was trying to meet me with honesty, she opened her phone and showed me the full thread with Jason, not just the casual jokes but the context. Jason was going through a rough patch, his dad had been hospitalized, and Megan's friend group had been checking in. There was nothing romantic there, nothing secretive, but the intimacy of shared history was still present, and that's what triggered me. The fact that someone else had known her first. I told myself I accepted it, but my behavior contradicted my words. I started asking questions like a prosecutor. What did he mean by that emoji? Why did you respond so fast? Why do you care? Megan answered at first, then stopped, because no answer satisfied insecurity. The breaking point of that phase came at a holiday party at my company. Megan came as my guest, dressed beautifully but not flashy, and she fit in effortlessly, talking to my coworkers, making them laugh, asking thoughtful questions. I should have been proud. Instead, I watched her like a guard dog watches a gate. When she stepped outside to take a call, I followed 10 minutes later and found her near the side entrance, phone to her ear, shoulders tense. I didn't even let her finish. Who is it? I demanded, loud enough that a couple people near the smoking area glanced over. Megan's eyes flashed. She covered the phone and said, It's Emma's school. She's sick. Can you not do this? But the damage was already done. The public humiliation, the way I'd made her look guilty in front of strangers. We left early. In the car, Megan didn't cry. She stared straight ahead, voice flat. You promised you accepted it, she said. I didn't have an answer that wasn't pathetic. The next morning, I got an email from the wedding venue we'd tentatively reserved for the following summer. Yes, we'd started planning quietly because both of us wanted stability for the kids. The email said our deposit was refunded due to a cancellation request. My heart stopped. I called the venue, confused, and the coordinator told me someone had called from my number, confirmed my details, and canceled. I checked my call log. There it was, a call I didn't remember making. The coordinator forwarded a voice recording from their system, and I recognized the voice immediately. Diane's voice, softened to sound like me, using enough personal details to pass. I felt cold all over. When I confronted my mother, she didn't even deny it. "You're rushing," she said. "And I won't sit back and watch you get trapped again." Trapped. As if Megan was a trap. As if my choice didn't belong to me. I exploded, yelling in my mother's living room like I was 16 again. Diane stayed eerily calm. "If you were thinking clearly, you'd thank me," she said. And then she delivered the line that made my blood run ice. "Besides, Megan's not exactly honest. Ask her what she's still holding on to." It was like Diane had been waiting to press that button. I drove home shaking. Megan was on the couch with Emma asleep against her, Caleb playing quietly nearby. The sight should have softened me. Instead, I felt invaded. My mother had crossed a line into our life, and Diane's accusation had planted a new fear. "What are you holding on to?" I asked Megan, voice harsh, and Megan's face changed instantly, like she'd been slapped by a question she didn't deserve. "What are you talking about?" she asked, careful. I told her about the venue cancellation. Megan's eyes widened, then narrowed with anger. "Your mother did that," she whispered. I nodded. Megan sat up slowly, careful not to wake Emma, and said something that cut deeper than yelling. "This is why I won't erase my past. Because people like her want to erase me." She was right. But instead of joining her anger at Diane, I let my fears spiral again. Diane's words echoed. Megan's shoebox flashed in my mind. I did something I'm ashamed of. While Megan was putting Emma to bed, I went into our closet and pulled out the shoebox like it was contraband. I opened it. Inside were photos, letters, small keepsakes, concert wristbands, a dried flower pressed between paper, a note written in Jason's handwriting from years ago. And then, tucked beneath those, was a copy of a bank statement and a legal-looking letter. My pulse hammered. It wasn't romantic. It was financial. It was proof of something unresolved. I felt panic because I didn't understand, and panic makes people cruel. When Megan came back into the bedroom, I was holding the letter. "What is this?" I asked, and my voice sounded like betrayal. Megan froze. Her eyes went to the letter, then to my face, and I watched her swallow hard, like she'd been forced into a corner she'd hoped never to revisit. "You went through my things," she said quietly. I wanted to justify it. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was caving in. Megan's voice turned steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "That's not about Jason," she said. "That's about my mother. And I didn't tell you because I didn't want your family to weaponize it." The word weaponize hung in the air like smoke, and I realized, with sick clarity, that my mother already was weaponizing everything she could touch. Once the door to that shoebox opened, everything poured out in a way that felt both inevitable and devastating. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, palms pressed together, and told me the truth. Years ago, when her divorce was fresh and her finances were fragile, her mother had taken out a line of credit in Megan's name to help with expenses, then kept using it until it ballooned. Megan had spent years cleaning it up, paying it down, trying to rebuild her credit so she could rent decent apartments, so she could give Emma a stable life. The legal-looking letter was from a collection agency she'd fought. She'd kept it not because it was unresolved now, but because it reminded her what manipulation looked like when it wore a family face. "My mother smiled while she did it," Megan said, voice tight. "She said I was ungrateful when I got upset. She told everyone I was dramatic." Sound familiar? It did. It sounded painfully familiar. I felt my shame deepen because I'd become an echo of the worst people in our lives. Megan didn't stop there. She told me that Jason, yes, Jason, had helped her when she was drowning in that mess, not by rescuing her like some romantic hero, but by connecting her to a financial counselor he knew and by watching Emma on weekends so Megan could work overtime. "He's part of my past because he was there when other people weren't," she said. "That doesn't mean I'm in love with him. It means I'm not going to pretend he never mattered." I stared at her, and for the first time, I understood that my insecurity wasn't about competition. It was about control. If I could force Megan to cut off every thread that connected her to anyone else, then I could pretend she belonged only to me, and that fantasy would protect me from abandonment. But fantasy isn't love. Megan looked at the open shoebox, and then back at me. "Do you know what it feels like," she said, voice shaking now, "to have your own partner treat you like a suspect?" My throat burned. I tried to speak and couldn't. She stood up and began putting the items back into the box with careful, reverent movements, like she was reclaiming her own history. "I told you the truth about my past," she said. "I didn't hide Jason. I didn't hide the shoebox. The only thing I hid was that letter because I didn't trust your family. And now I'm wondering if I can trust you." That sentence knocked the air out of me. I watched her walk out of the room and into the living room where Caleb was half asleep on the couch and Emma was curled under a blanket. Megan tucked the blanket around Emma, kissed her forehead, then looked at Caleb with softness that made my chest ache. "Hey, buddy," she said gently. "Can you go brush your teeth?" Caleb nodded and padded down the hall. Megan waited until he was out of earshot and then turned to me. "I'm staying at my friend Tara's tonight," she said. "The kids can stay here. I'm not punishing them for adult mess." I panicked immediately. "Megan, don't." I started, but she held up a hand. "I need space," she said. "And you need to decide if you're building a family with me or building a courtroom." She packed a bag quietly, efficiently. Watching her move through our home like a guest hurt in a way I didn't expect because it forced me to see what I'd risk losing. When she left, the house felt like the old Echo again. I barely slept. My mind ran in circles. Diane canceling the venue, Diane baiting me opening the shoebox, me humiliating Megan at the party. I wanted to fix it, but the problem was bigger than one apology. The next day, I drove to my mother's house, not to fight but to demand boundaries. Diane answered the door with that practiced expression of wounded innocence. "Are you here to yell again?" she asked, like she was the victim. I told her she crossed a line canceling the venue. Diane shrugged. "It's my job to protect you," she said. And I did. I asked her how she got my number to call the venue. Diane smiled. "You leave your passwords around," she said lightly. My blood turned cold. I asked what she meant. Diane waved a hand. "You've used my computer before. It's saved your logins." I just clicked. "If you didn't want me to see, you should have been more careful." I felt nauseous. She had been inside my accounts, inside my life. And if she could do that, she could do anything. "You access my accounts without permission," I said, voice trembling. Diane scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. You're acting like Megan now." That's when something in me snapped into clarity. Diane wasn't concerned. She was entitled. I told her she needed to stop interfering in my relationship. Diane's face hardened. "That woman is turning you against your family," she said. "First it's boundaries, next it's no contact. I've seen this." I realized then that Diane didn't fear Megan hurting me. She feared losing control over me. "You already tried to control my life once," I said, and Diane's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" she asked. I took a breath. "The divorce," I said. "You used it like a leash. You made me feel like I couldn't survive without you telling me what to do." Diane's mouth tightened. "You needed guidance," she said coldly. "You still do." That's when I told her the truth that I'd been avoiding. "If you touch my accounts again, if you contact my venue again, if you interfere with Megan again, you're out." Diane stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I'm your mother." And I realized she believed motherhood was a lifetime permission slip. I left, shaking. I called my bank in the car and changed everything. Passwords. PINs. Two-factor authentication. Then I did something that felt humiliating but necessary. I requested a credit report because if Diane had been inside my accounts, I needed to know what else she'd done. When the report loaded, my heart hammered harder. There were 2 inquiries I didn't recognize, recent. A credit card application. A personal loan pre-approval. My throat went dry. I called the issuer and learned the application had been started, but not finalized. Still, it meant Diane was trying. She was trying to entangle my finances, so I couldn't move freely. I drove home and found Caleb in his room, quiet, and my stomach twisted because my son was caught in the undertow of my family's dysfunction. That night, Megan didn't come back. She texted once. "Kids okay?" I replied with a photo of Caleb eating cereal, Emma coloring, both safe. Megan responded with a simple heart emoji. It should have comforted me. Instead, it broke me, because she was still caring even while I'd hurt her. 2 days later, Diane did what she always did when threatened. She went public. She posted on Facebook, vaguely, about protecting your children from unstable influences and how some people bring baggage that can ruin good families. She didn't name Megan, but my relatives knew. Comments poured in. Some people praised Diane for being strong. Allison messaged me, furious, saying Megan was drama and I needed to wake up. Megan's friend Tara sent me screenshots because someone had tagged Megan's sister in the comments. The humiliation was immediate and sickening, like being stripped in public. Megan called me that night, her voice quiet and strained. "I need you to handle your mother," she said. "Not with promises. With actions." I told her I was trying. Megan was silent for a long moment, then she said, "I can't raise Emma in a war zone." Hearing Emma's name made the stakes snap into focus. This wasn't about my pride. It was about 2 kids watching adults teach them what love looks like. I asked Megan to meet me, just us, no kids, at a small park by the lake where we'd taken them before. She agreed. When I arrived, Megan was sitting on a bench, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes red-rimmed but steady. I sat beside her, leaving space because I didn't deserve closeness. I apologized, fully, no excuses. I told her I'd opened the shoebox, and I was ashamed. Megan listened, expression unreadable. Then she said, quietly, "Do you understand why I said what I said?" I nodded. "Because it's not your job to amputate your history to soothe my fear," I said, and my voice cracked. Megan's shoulders relaxed just slightly, like she'd been bracing for denial. "And do you understand," she continued, "that your mother isn't just rude? She's dangerous." I nodded again and told her about the credit inquiries. Megan's face hardened. "That's what my mother did," she whispered. "That's why I kept the letter." There it was, the mirror. 2 manipulative mothers, 2 adult children trying to build something new, and my insecurity had allowed Diane to wedge herself into our foundation. Megan looked at me then, eyes sharp. "If we do this," she said, "it has to be different. You can't say fair point and then keep behaving the same." I swallowed. "Then tell me what you need," I said. Megan stared at the water for a moment, then back at me. "I need you to accept my whole past," she said, "and I need you to stop letting your family rewrite your reality." I nodded. And in that moment, the title line came back to me. The hallway, the accusation, the acceptance, but now it felt heavier, more real. "I meant it," I said, voice low. "Fair point. Accepted. Not just the words. The work." Megan's eyes glistened and she whispered, "Then prove it." And I knew the next move would either save our family or end it. The confrontation that finally shattered the illusion happened on a Saturday morning, the kind that should have been ordinary. Pancakes, cartoons, laundry, but nothing was ordinary anymore. Diane showed up unannounced, as she often did, except this time she didn't even pretend she was dropping by kindly. She came with a folder tucked under her arm like she was arriving for a deposition. Caleb was at the kitchen counter pouring syrup. Emma was on the floor drawing, and Megan, back home after we'd agreed to try again, was flipping pancakes, hair pulled back, face calmer but still cautious. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Megan's shoulders tightened immediately. I went to the door and saw Diane standing there in a crisp sweater, lipstick perfect, eyes bright with purpose. "We need to talk," she said, already stepping forward as if my house was hers. I blocked the doorway. "Not like this," I said, keeping my voice low because the kids were right behind me. Diane's eyes flicked past me, toward Megan. "She's here," Diane said, tone sour. "Of course she is." Megan had walked into the hallway, wiping her hands on a towel, expression neutral. "Diane," Megan said calmly. Diane ignored her and looked at me. "I'm not leaving until you see this," she said, waving the folder. I felt my heart pound. "You're not coming in," I said. Diane's face tightened, then she smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "Fine," she said loudly, raising her voice just enough for the kids to hear. "We'll do it on the porch. Let them see what happens when you choose the wrong woman." Megan's jaw clenched. Caleb's eyes widened. Emma froze mid-drawing. Something inside me went cold and clear. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, leaving Megan with the kids, and faced my mother on the porch like a man finally ready to stop being a boy. "What is it?" I said flatly. Diane opened the folder and pulled out printed screenshots, messages, photos, fragments of Megan's past pulled from social media, from who knows where. But then she pulled out something worse, a printed copy of the collection letter I'd found in Megan's shoebox, the same exact document, and my blood turned to ice because that meant Diane had been in my house, in my bedroom, in our closet, without us knowing. "How did you get that?" I whispered. Diane's eyes glittered. "Don't change the subject," she snapped. "Read it. She's hiding debt. She's hiding legal problems. She's going to drag you down." My hands shook as I held the paper. I felt nauseated not at Megan but at Diane. "You broke into my house," I said. Diane scoffed. "I have a key," she said, and then she said the line that made me see the full monster. "I made a copy months ago, just in case." Months. She'd planned this. She'd been waiting. "You've been inside my home," I said slowly, voice trembling with rage. Diane leaned closer, eyes cold. "I'm trying to save you," she hissed. "That woman is poison. She's got men from her past still circling. She's got baggage. She's already turned you against me." I felt my vision blur with anger. "No," I said, voice rising despite myself. "You did that. You did it by canceling our venue and trying to open credit in my name and posting garbage online and breaking into my house." Diane's face twisted. "I did what I had to do," she snapped, then lowered her voice and delivered the cruelest cut of all. "You think she's loyal? Ask her why Jason still has access to her. Ask her why she never told you about Trent, the real father. Ask her what kind of mother she is." I stared at Diane, horrified. "How do you know Trent's name?" I asked, because Megan had barely told me. Diane's smile widened. "Because I looked," she said simply. "I did a background search. I paid for it. I know everything." My stomach dropped. "You ran a background check on Megan," I said, voice shaking. Diane shrugged. "I ran one on Lauren too once," she said casually, like this was normal. The realization hit me like a wave. My mother had been the unseen hand in so many parts of my life, pushing, prying, controlling, and I'd let her because it was easier than standing alone. Behind the door, I heard Megan's voice soothing the kids, trying to keep them calm. I couldn't let Diane poison them too. I took a deep breath and said clearly, "Give me the key." Diane blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked. "The key?" I repeated. "Now." Diane's face reddened. "You're choosing her," she whispered, wounded rage flickering. "After everything I'd done for you." "I'm choosing my family," I said, and the word family meant something new. Diane's eyes darted, calculating, then she did what she always did when losing. She escalated. She raised her voice and shouted toward the door. "Megan, tell him about Jason. Tell him you still talk to him, at midnight. Tell him you still keep his letters." The door opened abruptly, and Megan stepped out, face pale but calm, like she'd been expecting this moment her whole life. She held Emma's hand tightly. Caleb stood behind her, eyes wide, confused. My chest clenched seeing the kids pulled into this. Megan looked at Diane, then at me, and her voice was steady when she spoke. "Yes," Megan said. "I have my past. I have memories. I have people who mattered. And I'm not ashamed." Diane sneered. "So you admit it," she said triumphantly. Megan didn't flinch. "I admit I lived before your son," she said. "And I admit I won't let you punish me for it." Diane turned to me, eyes blazing. "She's defiant," Diane hissed. She'll never respect you. Megan squeezed Emma's hand and then looked at me, eyes shining with restrained emotion. I'm not cutting off my past just because you're insecure, she said again, but this time it wasn't a defensive line in a hallway. It was a boundary spoken on a battlefield. Diane smirked like she'd won. My throat tightened, and I looked at Megan, then at Caleb and Emma, then back at Diane, and the words came out of me with a calm that surprised even me. Fair point. Diane's smirk faltered. Emma asked if Diane was mad at her. Megan hugged her and said, "No, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." Emma's little shoulders relaxed like she'd been carrying guilt. That alone made every hard step worth it. Within a month, Megan and I filed for a protective order after Diane showed up at Emma's school, claiming she was family and asking the receptionist for information. The school staff called Megan because Megan was listed as primary contact, and Megan's hand shook when she told me. "She's trying to get access to the kids," Megan whispered. My blood ran cold. That was the line we couldn't unsee. The protective order process was humiliating, standing in a courtroom, talking about my mother's behavior in front of strangers, but it was also clarifying. The judge granted a temporary order based on documented harassment and trespassing, then later a longer-term order with clear conditions. Diane wasn't allowed near our home or the kids' schools. If she violated it, there would be consequences. When Diane was served, she called me screaming, saying I was dead to her. I didn't scream back. I simply said, "You did this," and hung up. Megan cried that night, not triumphant tears, but grief. I held her and let the grief exist because cutting people off, even harmful people, is still loss. Through all of it, the title moment kept echoing. Fair point. Accepted. It became more than a line. It became a practice. When insecurity flared, I named it. When Megan mentioned Jason in passing, I checked my internal reaction and reminded myself, history isn't a threat. I stopped asking her to shrink her life to fit my fear. Instead, I expanded my capacity to tolerate reality. Megan didn't cut off Jason, but she did adjust boundaries in a way that respected our relationship. No late-night casual texting, not because I demanded it, but because she recognized it made sense for our household rhythm. She told Jason directly, "I'm building a life with someone. I'm still your friend, but the context has changed." Jason responded with maturity. "I get it. I'm glad you're happy." That response, oddly, helped heal something in me because it proved my fear had been exaggerated by the wrong people. The real threat hadn't been Megan's past. It had been my family's insistence on owning my present. Now, a year later, the quiet in our home feels earned rather than empty. The kids are louder again. Caleb's laugh returns easily. Emma sings while she brushes her teeth, and the tension that used to live in my shoulders has loosened enough that I sometimes catch myself breathing deeply without thinking. Diane is still out there somewhere, still convinced she's the hero of her own story, but she is no longer the narrator of mine. The protective order remains in place. Allison has drifted away, choosing loyalty to Diane over truth, and that still hurts sometimes in a dull, surprising way, but the pain doesn't control me anymore. Megan and I did get engaged, not because we needed a ring to prove we survived, but because we wanted to choose each other with clarity. Our wedding ended up being smaller than we originally imagined, held at a lakeside community center with close friends, the kids dressed up and grinning, Megan's friend Tara crying openly during the vows, my dad standing quietly in the back with wet eyes. There was no drama because there was no access for drama. When Megan walked toward me, she didn't look like someone being claimed. She looked like someone arriving as herself, whole. And when I said my vows, I didn't promise to protect her from the world like a hero. I promised to respect her as a person, to own my insecurity rather than outsource it as control, to build a home where our kids would learn that love doesn't demand erasure. After the wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday night, Megan was putting old photos into a small album with Emma. I watched from the doorway as Emma asked, "Who's that?" and Megan smiled and said, "That's me when I was younger." Emma giggled and said, "You look funny." And Megan laughed, warm and free. I felt a flicker of the old insecurity. Who else had seen that younger Megan? Who else had held her hand then? but the flicker passed because I'd learned something I wish I'd learned sooner. You don't get to love someone by owning the parts of them that existed before you. You love them by making room for the whole story. Megan glanced up and caught my expression. You okay? She asked softly. I walked over, kissed her forehead, and said, yeah, I'm good. And I meant it. Later, when the kids were asleep, Megan leaned against me on the couch and said, almost teasing but still serious, so, still accepted? I smiled, the kind that comes from scars that have healed into strength, and I said, fair point, then pulled her closer and added, accepted. Every day. The peace we have now isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of boundaries. It's the understanding that betrayal isn't always cheating. Sometimes betrayal is letting someone else poison your home because you're too afraid to confront your own fear. I betrayed Megan when I searched for proof instead of building trust. I betrayed myself when I let Diane dictate my reality. But I also learned that redemption isn't a grand gesture. It's changing the locks. It's going to therapy. It's admitting you were wrong without making your apology another demand. It's protecting children from adult chaos. It's allowing a woman you love to keep her history without treating it like competition. And it's recognizing that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is say, calmly and sincerely, fair point, accepted, and then live like he means it.